Chapter 45 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 45. I will give 2,000 crowns to any man who shall deliver over to me Luis Perez, dead or alive. Calderon, Luis Perez of Galicia.
Baron Votoun, colonel of the Munkholm musketeers. Which of the men who fought under your command at Black Pillar Pass took Hans of Iceland prisoner? Name him to the court, that he may receive the 1,000 crowns reward offered for the capture.
The president of the court thus addressed the colonel of musketeers. The court was in session, for according to old Norwegian custom, a court from whose sentence there is no appeal cannot adjourn until the sentence has been carried out. Before the judges stood the giant, who had just been led in again, with the rope round his neck from which he was soon to hang. The colonel, seated at the table with the private secretary, rose, and bowed to the court and to the bishop, who had reascended his throne. My lord judges, the soldier who captured Hans of Iceland is present. His name is Toric Belfast, second musketeer of my regiment.
Let him stand forth,
replied the president,
and receive the promised reward.
A young soldier in the Munkholm uniform stepped forward.
You are Toric Belfast?
Asked the president. Yes, your worship.
It was you who took Hans of Iceland prisoner?
Yes, by the aid of Saint Beelzebub, I did, please your worship. A heavy bag of money was placed before the bench.
Do you recognize this man as the famous Hans of Iceland?
Added the president, pointing to the fettered giant. I am better acquainted with my Kitty's pretty face than with that of Hans of Iceland, but I declare, by the halo of St. Belphegor, that if Hans of Iceland be anywhere, it is in the shape of that big devil.
Advance, Toric Belfast,
said the president.
Here are the 1,000 crowns offered by the Lord Mayor.
The soldier hurried toward the bench, when a voice rose from the crowd.
Munkholm musketeer, you never captured Hans of Iceland.
By all the blessed devils, cried the soldier, turning around. I own nothing but my pipe and the moment of time in which I speak, but still I promise to give 10,000 gold crowns to the man who says that, if he can prove his words. And folding his arms, he cast an assured glance over the audience. Well, let the man who spoke show himself.
It is I,
said a small man, elbowing his way through the crowd. The newcomer was wrapped in sealskin, like a Greenlander, his outlandish garb hanging stiffly about him. His beard was black, and thick hair of the same color, falling over his red eyebrows, concealed a hideous face. Neither his hands nor his arms were visible. Oh, it is you, is it? Said the soldier with a loud laugh. And who, then, do you say it was, my fine gentleman, that had the honor of capturing that infernal giant? The little man shook his head, and said with a malicious smile,
It was I.
At this instant Baron Votoun fancied that he recognized the mysterious being who had warned him at Skongen of the arrival of the rebels. Chancellor d'Ahlefeld thought he recognized his host at Arbor Ruin, and the private secretary, a certain peasant from Oelmo, who wore a similar dress, and who had pointed out the lair of Hans of Iceland. But the three being separated, they could not impart to one another this fleeting impression, which the differences of feature and costume, afterward observed, must have soon dissipated. Indeed, it was you, was it? Ironically observed the soldier. If it were not for your Greenland seal's costume, by the look which you cast at me, I should be tempted to take you for another ridiculous dwarf, who tried to pick a quarrel with me at the Spladgest a fortnight or so ago. It was the very day that they brought in the body of Jill Studd, the miner.
Jill Studd,
broke in the little man with a shudder. Yes, Jill Studd, repeated the soldier with an air of indifference, the rejected lover of a girl who was sweetheart to a comrade of mine, and for whose sake he died, like the fool that he was. The little man said in hollow tones,
Was there not also the body of an officer of your regiment at the Spladgest?
Exactly. I shall remember that day as long as I live. I forgot that it was the hour for the tattoo, and I was arrested when I got back to the fort. That officer was Captain Dispolson. At this name the private secretary rose. These two fellows abuse the patience of the court. We beg the president to cut short this idle chatter. By my Kitty's good name, I ask nothing better, said Toric Belfast, provided your worships will give me the 1,000 crowns offered for the head of Hans, for it was I who took him prisoner.
You lie,
cried the little man. The soldier clapped his hand to his sword. It is very lucky for you, you rascal, that we are in the presence of the court, where a soldier, even a Munkholm musketeer, must never resort to force.
The reward,
coldly observed the little man,
belongs to me, for if it were not for me, you would never have won Hans of Iceland's head.
The indignant soldier swore that it was he who captured Hans of Iceland, when, wounded on the field of battle, he was just beginning to revive.
Well,
said his opponent,
you may have captured him, but it was I who struck him down. If it had not been for me, you could never have taken him prisoner. Therefore, the 1,000 crowns are mine.
It is false, replied the soldier. It was not you who struck him down. It was an evil spirit, clad in the skins of wild beasts.
It was I.
No, no. The president ordered both parties to be silent, then again asking Colonel Wotaun whether it was really Toric Belfast who brought Hans of Iceland into camp a prisoner. At his assent he declared that the prize belonged to the soldier. The small man gnashed his teeth, and the musketeer greedily stretched out his hands for the sack.
"One moment,"
cried the little man.
"Mr. President, that money, according to the Lord Mayor's proclamation, was to be given to him who took Hans of Iceland."
"Well," said the judge. The little man turned to the giant.
"That man is not Hans of Iceland."
A murmur of surprise ran through the room. The president and private secretary moved uneasily in their chairs.
"No,"
emphatically reiterated the small man.
"The money does not belong to the cursed musketeer of Munkholm, for that man is not Hans of Iceland."
"Halberdiers,"
said the president,
"remove this madman. He has lost his senses."
The bishop interposed. "Will you allow me, most worthy president, to remark that you may, by refusing to hear this man, destroy the prisoner's last chance? I demand that he be confronted with the stranger."
"Reverend bishop, the court will grant your request,"
replied the president, and addressing the giant,
"You have declared yourself to be Hans of Iceland. Do you persist in that statement?"
The prisoner answered,
"I do. I am Hans of Iceland." "You hear, bishop."
The little man shouted in the same breath with the president.
"You lie, mountaineer of Kjellön. You lie. Do not persist in bearing a name which must crush you. Remember that it has been fatal to you already."
"I am Hans from Klipstadur in Iceland,"
repeated the giant, his eye riveted on the private secretary. The small man approached the Munkholm soldier, who, like the rest of the audience, had watched this scene with eager curiosity.
"Mountaineer of Kjellön," he cried, "they say that Hans of Iceland drinks human blood. If you be he, drink. Here it is."
and scarcely were the words out of his mouth, when, tossing his sealskin mantle over his shoulder, he plunged a dagger into the soldier's heart, and flung his dead body at the giant's feet. A cry of fright and horror followed. The soldiers guarding the giant started back. The small man, swift as lightning, rushed upon the defenseless mountaineer, and with another blow of his dagger laid him upon the first corpse. Then, flinging off his cloak, his false hair, and black beard, he revealed his wiry limbs, hideously attired in the skins of wild beasts, and a face which inspired the beholders with even greater horror than did the bloody dagger which he brandished aloft, reeking with a double murder.
Ha! Judges, where is Hans of Iceland now?
Guards, seize that monster!
Cried the startled judge. Hans hurled his dagger into the center of the room.
It is useless to me if there are no more Munkholm soldiers here.
With these words he yielded unresistingly to the halberdiers and bowmen who surrounded him, prepared to lay siege to him as to a city. They chained the monster to the prisoner's bench, and the litter bore away his victims, one of whom, the mountaineer, still breathed. It is impossible to describe the various emotions of terror, astonishment, and indignation which, during this fearful scene, agitated the people, the guards, and the judges. When the brigand had taken his place, calm and unmoved, upon the fatal bench, a feeling of curiosity overcame every other impression, and breathless attention restored quiet. The venerable bishop rose.
My lord judges.
The bandit interrupted him.
Bishop of Trondheim, I am Hans of Iceland. Do not take the trouble to plead for me.
The private secretary rose.
Noble president.
The monster cut him short.
Private secretary, I am Hans of Iceland. Do not take the pains to accuse me.
Then, his feet in a pool of blood, he ran his bold, fierce eye over the court, the bowmen, and the crowd, and it seemed as if each of them trembled with fear at the glance of that one man, unarmed, chained, and alone.
Listen, judges. Expect no long speeches from me. I am the demon of Klipstadur. My mother was old Iceland, the land of volcanoes. Once that land was but one huge mountain. It was crushed by the hand of a giant, who fell from heaven and rested on its highest peak. I need not speak of myself. I am the descendant of Ingolf the Destroyer, and I bear his spirit within me. I have committed more murders and kindled more fires than all of you put together ever uttered unjust sentences in your lives. I have secrets in common with Chancellor D'Ahlefeld. I could drink every drop of blood that flows in your veins with delight. It is my nature to hate mankind, my mission to harm them. Colonel of the Munkholm musketeers, it was I who warned you of the march of the miners through Black Pillar Pass, sure that you would kill numbers of men in those gorges. It was I who destroyed a whole battalion of your regiment by hurling granite boulders upon their heads. I did it to avenge my son. Now, judges, my son is dead. I came here in search of death. The soul of Ingolf oppresses me, because I must bear it alone, and can never transmit it to an heir. I am tired of life, since it can no longer be an example and a lesson to a successor. I have drunk enough blood. My thirst is quenched. Now, here I am. You may drink mine.
He was silent, and every voice repeated his awful words. The bishop said, "My son, what was your object in committing so many crimes?" The brigand laughed.
"In faith, I swear, reverend bishop, it was not like your brother, the Bishop of Borglum, with a view to enrich myself. There was something in me which drove me to it."
"God does not always dwell in his ministers," meekly replied the saintly old man. "You would insult me, but I only wish I could defend you."
"Your reverence wastes his breath. Go, ask your other brother, the Bishop of Skalholt in Iceland, to defend me." "By Ingolf, it is a strange thing that two bishops should protect me, one in my cradle, the other at my tomb. Bishop, you are an old fool."
"My son, do you believe in God?"
"Why not? There must be a God for us to blaspheme."
"Cease, unhappy man! You are about to die, and you will not kiss the feet of Christ." Hans of Iceland shrugged his shoulders.
"If I did so, it would be after the fashion of the Constable of Roll, who pulled the king over as he kissed his foot."
The bishop seated himself, deeply moved.
"Come, judges,"
continued Hans of Iceland.
"Why this delay? If I were in your place, and you in mine, I would not keep you waiting so long for your death sentence."
The court withdrew. After a brief deliberation, they returned, and the president read aloud the sentence which declared that Hans of Iceland was to be hung by the neck until he was dead, dead, dead.
"That's good,"
said the brigand.
"Chancellor d'Ahlefeld, I know enough about you to obtain a like sentence for you. But live, since you do naught but injure men. Oh, I am sure now that I shall not go to Nistheim."
The private secretary ordered the guards who led him away to place him in the Lion of Schleswig tower until a dungeon could be prepared for him in the quarters of the Munkholm regiment, where he might await his execution.
"In the quarters of the Munkholm musketeers,"
repeated the monster, with a growl of pleasure. End of chapter 45. Chapter 46 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 46. However, the corpse of Ponce de Leon, which had remained beside the fountain, having been disfigured by the sun, the Moors of Alpujarres took possession of it and bore it to Granada. E. H., the captive of Ochali. Before dawn of the day so many of whose events we have already traced, at the very hour when Ordener's sentence was pronounced at Munkholm, the new keeper of the Trondheim Splagest, Benignus Bjargri's former assistant and present successor, Oglypiglap, was abruptly aroused from his mattress by a violent series of raps, which fairly shook the building. He rose reluctantly, took his copper lamp, whose dim light dazzled his drowsy eyes, and went, swearing at the dampness of the dead house, to open to those who waked him so early from his sleep. They were fishers from Sparbo, who carried upon a litter, strewed with weeds, rushes, and seaweed, a corpse which they had found in the waters of the lake. They laid down their burden within the gloomy walls, and Oglypiglap gave them a receipt for it, so that they might claim their fee. Left alone in the Splagest, he began to undress the corpse, which was remarkable for its length and leanness. The first thing which caught his eye, as he raised the cloth which covered it, was a vast periwig. "Why, really," said he,
This outlandish wig has passed through my hands before. It belonged to that young French dandy. And, he added, continuing his investigations, here are the high boots of poor postilion Cramner, who was killed by his horses, and what the devil does this mean? The full black suit of Professor Singramtax, that learned old fogey who drowned himself not long ago. Who can this newcomer be that comes here clad in the cast-off apparel of all my ancient acquaintance? He examined the face of the dead by the light of his lamp, but in vain. The features, already decomposed, had lost their original shape and colour. He felt in the pockets and drew out some scraps of parchment soaked with water and stained with mud. He wiped them carefully on his leather apron, and succeeded in deciphering on one of them these disconnected and half-effaced phrases. Rudbeck, Saxon the Grammarian. Arngrimson, Bishop of Hollum. There are but 2 counties in Norway, Larvik and Jarlsberg, and but 1 barony. Silver mines exist only at Kongsberg, lodestone and asbestos at Sundmoor, amethyst at Gulbrandshall, chalcedony, agate and jasper at the Faroe Islands. At Nukahiva in time of famine men eat their wives and children. Thormodr Torfusson, Isleif, Bishop of Skalholt, first historian of Iceland. Mercury played at chess with the moon and won the 72nd part of a day. Maelstrom, whirlpool. Hirundo. Cicero. Chickpea, glory. The learned Frode. Odin consulted the head of Mimer the wise. Mahomet and his dove. Sertorius and his hind. The more the soil, the less gypsum it contains. I can scarcely believe my eyes, he cried, dropping the parchment. It is the writing of my old master, Benignus Bjergodry. Then, examining the corpse afresh, he recognized the long lean hands, the scanty hair, and the whole build of the unfortunate man. They were not so much out of the way after all, thought he, shaking his head, who charged him with sacrilege and necromancy. The devil carried him off to drown him in Lake Sparbo. What poor fools we mortals be! Who would have thought that Dr. Spiagudry, after taking so many people to board in his hostelry of the dead, would come here at last from afar to be cared for himself? The little lab philosopher lifted the body to remove it to one of his 6 granite beds, when he found that something heavy was fastened about the unhappy Spiagudry's neck by a leather cord. Probably the stone with which the devil pitched him into the lake, he muttered. He was mistaken. It was a small iron box, upon which, on examining it closely, after wiping it carefully, he discovered a large, shield-shaped padlock. Of course there is some deviltry in this box, said he. The man was a sacrilegious sorcerer. I will hand it over to the bishop. It may contain an evil spirit. Then, taking it from the corpse, which he placed in the inner room, he hurried away to the bishop's palace, muttering a prayer as he went, as a charm against the dreadful box under his arm. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 47. Is it a man or an infernal spirit that speaks thus? What mischievous spirit torments thee thus? Show me the relentless foe who inhabits thy heart. Maturin. Hans of Iceland and Schumaker were in the same cell in the Schleswig Tower. The acquitted ex-chancellor paced slowly to and fro, his eyes heavy with bitter tears. The condemned brigand laughed at his chains, though surrounded by guards. The 2 prisoners studied each other long and silently. It seemed as if both felt themselves and mutually recognized each other as enemies of mankind. "Who are you?" at length asked the ex-chancellor. "I will tell you my name," replied the bandit, "to make you shun me. I am Hans of Iceland."
Schumaker advanced toward him.
"Take my hand,"
said he.
"Do you wish me to devour it?"
"Hans of Iceland,"
rejoined Schumaker,
"I like you because you hate mankind."
"And for that reason I hate you."
"Hark ye, I hate men as you do, because they have returned me evil for good."
"You do not hate them as I do. I hate them because they have returned me good for evil."
Schumaker shuddered at the monster's expression. In vain he conquered his natural disposition, he could not sympathize with this fiend.
"Yes," he exclaimed, "I abhor men because they are false, ungrateful, cruel. I owe to them all the misery of my life."
"So much the better. I owe them all the pleasure of mine."
"What pleasure?"
"The pleasure of feeling their quivering flesh throb beneath my teeth, their hot blood moisten my parched throat, the rapture of crushing living beings against sharp rocks, and hearing the shriek of my victims mingle with the sound of their breaking limbs. These are the pleasures which I owe to man."
Schumaker shrank in horror from the monster whom he had approached with something like pride in his resemblance to him. Pierced with shame, he hid his wrinkled face in his hands, for his eyes were full of tears of anger, not against mankind, but against himself. His great and noble heart began to revolt at the hatred he had so long cherished, when he saw it reflected in Hans of Iceland's heart as in a fearful mirror.
"Well,"
said the monster with a sneer,
"well, enemy of man, there you boast your likeness to me."
The old man shuddered.
"Oh God, rather than hate mankind as you do, let me love them."
Guards came to remove the monster to a more secure cell. Schumaker was left alone in his dungeon to dream. But he was no longer the enemy of mankind. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 48. Keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from the violent men, who have purposed to thrust aside my step. The proud have hid a snare for me, and cords. They have spread a net by the wayside. They have set gins for me. Psalms 140, 4. The fatal hour had come. The sun showed but half his disk above the horizon. The guards were doubled throughout Munkholm castle. Before each door paced fierce, silent sentinels. The noises of the town seemed louder and more confused than usual as they ascended to the dark towers of the fortress, itself a prey to strange excitement. The mournful sound of muffled drums was heard in every courtyard. Now and again cannon growled. The heavy bell in the dungeon tolled slowly, with sullen, measured strokes, and from every direction boats loaded with people hastened toward the fearful rock. A scaffold hung with black, around which an impatient mob swarmed in ever-increasing numbers, rose from the castle parade ground in the centre of a hollow square of troops. Upon the scaffold a man, clad in red serge, walked up and down, now leaning upon the axe in his hand, and now fingering a billet and block upon the funeral platform. Close at hand a stake was prepared, before which several pitch-torches burned. Between the scaffold and the stake was planted a post, from which hung the inscription, Ordener Guldenlew, traitor. A black flag floated from the top of the Schleswig tower. At this moment Ordener appeared before the judges still assembled in the court-room. The bishop alone was absent. His office as counsel for the defence had ended. The son of the viceroy was dressed in black, and wore upon his neck the collar of the Dannebrog. His face was pale but proud. He was alone, for he had been led forth to torture before Chaplain Athanasius Munder returned to his cell. Ordener's sacrifice was already inwardly accomplished, and yet Ethel's husband still clung to life, and might perhaps have chosen another night than that of the tomb for his wedding night. He had prayed and dreamed many dreams in his dreary cell. Now he was beyond all prayers and all dreams. He was strong in the strength imparted by religion and by love. The crowd, more deeply moved than the prisoner, eagerly gazed at him. His illustrious rank, his horrible fate, awakened universal envy and pity. Every spectator watched his punishment without comprehending his crime. In every human heart lurks a strange feeling which urges its owner to behold the tortures of others as well as their pleasures. Men seek with awful avidity to read destruction upon the distorted features of one who is about to die, as if some revelation from heaven or from hell must appear at that awful moment in the poor wretch's eyes, as if they would learn what sort of shadow is cast by the death angel's wing as he hovers over a human head, as if they would search and know what is left to a man when hope is gone. That being, full of health and strength, moving, breathing, living, and which in another instant must cease to move, breathe, and live, surrounded by beings like himself, whom he never harmed, all of whom pity him, and none of whom can help him, that wretched being, dying, though not dead, bending alike beneath an earthly power and an invisible might, this life which society could not give, but which it takes with all the pomp and ceremony of legal murder, profoundly stirred the popular imagination. Condemned as all of us are to death, with an indefinite reprieve, the unfortunate man who knows the exact hour when his reprieve expires is an object of strange and painful curiosity. The reader may remember that before he mounted the scaffold, Ordener was to be taken before the court, there to be stripped of his titles and honours. Hardly had the stir excited in the assembly by his arrival given place to quiet, when the president ordered the book of heraldry of both kingdoms and the statutes of the Order of the Dannebrog to be brought. Then directing the prisoner to kneel upon one knee, he commanded the spectators to pay respectful heed, opened the book of the Knights of the Dannebrog, and began to read in a loud, stern voice.
We, Christian, by the grace and mercy of Almighty God, King of Denmark and Norway, of Goths and Vandals, Duke of Schleswig, Holstein, Stormaria and Dithmarsen, Count of Oldenburg and Delmenhorst, do declare that having re-established at the suggestion of the Lord Chancellor, Count Griffenfeld, the president passed over this name so rapidly that it was scarcely audible, the Royal Order of the Dannebrog, founded by our illustrious ancestor Saint Valdemar, whereas we hold that inasmuch as the said venerable order was created in memory of the flag Dannebrog, sent down from heaven to our blessed kingdom, it would belie the divine origin of the order should any knight forfeit his honour, or break the holy laws of church and state with impunity. We therefore decree, kneeling before God, that whosoever of the knights of the order shall deliver his soul to the demon by any felony or treason, after a public reprimand from the court, shall be forever degraded from his rank as a knight of this our royal order of the Dannebrog.
The president closed the book.
Ordener Guldenlew, Baron Thorwig, Knight of the Dannebrog, you have been found guilty of high treason, for which crime your head shall be cut off, your body burned, and your ashes flung to the winds. Ordener Guldenlew, traitor, you have shown yourself unworthy to hold rank with the knights of the Dannebrog. I request you to humble yourself, for I am about to degrade you publicly in the name of the king.
The president stretched his hand over the book of the order, and prepared to pronounce the fatal formula against Ordener, who remained calm and motionless, when a side door opened to the right of the bench. An officer of the church entered and announced his reverence the Bishop of Trondheim. He entered hurriedly, accompanied by another ecclesiastic, on whose arm he leaned. "Stop, Mr. President!" he exclaimed with a strength of which a man of his age seemed hardly capable. "Stop! Heaven be praised! I am in time." The audience listened with renewed interest, foreseeing some fresh development. The president turned angrily to the bishop.
"Allow me to inform your reverence that your presence here is wholly unnecessary. The court is about to degrade from his rank the prisoner, who will suffer the penalty of his crime directly."
"Forbear," said the bishop, "to lay hands on one who is pure in the sight of God. The prisoner is innocent." The cry of astonishment which burst from the spectators was only matched by the cry of terror uttered by the president and private secretary. "Yes, tremble, judges," resumed the bishop, before the president could recover his usual presence of mind. "Tremble, for you are about to shed innocent blood." As the president's agitation died away, Ordener arose in consternation. The noble youth feared lest his generous ruse had been discovered and proofs of Schumaker's guilt had been found.
"Bishop,"
said the president,
"in this affair crime seems to evade us, being transferred from one to another. Do not trust to any mere appearances. If Ordener Guldenlew be innocent, who then is guilty?" "Your grace shall know," replied the bishop. Then, showing the court an iron casket, which a servant had brought in behind him, "Noble lords, you have judged in darkness. Within this casket is the miraculous light which shall dissipate that darkness." The president, private secretary, and Ordener all seemed amazed at the sight of the mysterious casket. The bishop added, "Noble judges, hear me. Today, as I return to my palace, to rest from the fatigues of the night, and to pray for the prisoners, I received this sealed iron box. The keeper of the Splagist, I was told, brought it to the palace this morning to be given to me, declaring that it undoubtedly contained some satanic charm, as he had found it on the body of the sacrilegious Benignus Biagodry, which had just been fished out of Lake Sparbo." Ordener listened more eagerly than ever. All the spectators were as still as death. The president and private secretary hung their heads guiltily. They seemed to have lost all their cunning and audacity. There is a moment in the life of every sinner when his power vanishes. "After blessing this casket," continued the bishop, "we broke the seal, which, as you can still see, bears the ancient and now extinct arms of Griffenfeld. We did indeed find a devilish secret within. You shall judge for yourselves, venerable sirs. Lend me your most earnest attention, for human blood is at stake, and the Lord will hold you accountable for every drop that you may shed." Then, opening the terrible casket, he drew forth a slip of parchment, upon which was written the following testimony: "I, Blackstem Cambisulsum, doctor, being about to die, do declare that of my own free will and pleasure I have placed in the hands of Captain Dispolsen, the agent at Copenhagen of the former Count Griffenfeld, the enclosed document, drawn up wholly by the hand of Turiaf Musdemon, servant of the Chancellor, Count d'Ahlefeld, to the end that the said captain may make such use of it as shall seem to him best. And I pray God to pardon my crimes. Given under my hand and seal at Copenhagen, this 11th day of January, 1699. Cambisulsum." The private secretary shook like a leaf. He tried to speak, but could not. The bishop handed the parchment to the pale and agitated president. "What do I see?"
exclaimed the latter as he unfolded the parchment.
"A note to the noble Count d'Ahlefeld, upon the means of legally ridding himself of Schumaker. I swear, reverend bishop."
The paper dropped from his trembling fingers. Read it, sir," said the bishop. "I doubt not that your unworthy servant has abused your name as he has that of the unfortunate Schumaker. Only see the result of your uncharitable aversion to your fallen predecessor. One of your followers has plotted his ruin in your name, doubtless hoping to make a merit of it to your grace." These words revived the president, as showing him that the suspicions of the bishop, who was acquainted with the entire contents of the casket, had not fallen upon him. Ordener also breathed more freely. He began to see that the innocence of Ethel's father might be made manifest at the same time with his own. He felt a deep surprise at the singular fate which had led him to pursue a fearful brigand to recover this casket, which his old guide Benignus Biagodry bore about him all the time; that it was actually following him while he was seeking for it. He also reflected on the solemn lesson of the events which, after ruining him by means of this same fatal casket, now proved the instrument of his salvation. The president, recovering himself, read with much show of indignation, in which the entire audience shared, a lengthy memorandum in which Musdemon set forth all the details of the abominable scheme which we have seen him execute in the course of this story. Several times the private secretary attempted to rise and defend himself, but each time he was frowned down. At last the odious reading came to an end amid a murmur of universal horror.
"Halberdiers, seize that man,"
said the president, pointing to the private secretary. The wretch, speechless and almost lifeless, stepped from his place and was cast into the criminal dock, followed by the hoots of the populace. "Judges," said the bishop, "shudder and rejoice. The truth, which has just been brought home to your consciences, will now be even more strongly confirmed by the testimony of our honored brother Athanasius Munder, chaplain to the prisons of this royal town." It was indeed Athanasius Munder who accompanied the bishop. He bowed to his superior in the church and to the court, then, at a sign from the president, proceeded as follows. "What I am about to state is the truth. May heaven punish me if I utter a word with any other object than to do my duty. From what I saw this morning in the cell of the viceroy's son, I was led to think that the young man was not guilty, although your lordships had condemned him upon his own confession. Now I was called, a few hours since, to give the last spiritual consolations to the unfortunate mountaineer, so cruelly murdered before your very eyes, and whom you condemned, worthy sirs, as being Hans of Iceland. The dying man said to me, 'I am not Hans of Iceland. I am justly punished for having assumed his name. I was paid to play the part by the chancellor's private secretary. He is called Musdemon, and it was he who managed the whole revolt under the name of Hacket. I believe him to be the only guilty man in this whole matter.' Then he asked me to give him my blessing, and advised me to make haste and repeat his last words to the court. God is my witness. May I save the shedding of innocent blood, and not cause that of the guilty to flow." He ceased, again bowing to his bishop and the judges. "Your grace sees," said the bishop to the president, "that one of my clients was not mistaken when he found so much resemblance between Hacket and your private secretary."
"Turiaf Musdemon," said the president to the prisoner, "what have you to say in your defense?"
Musdemon looked at his master with an expression which alarmed him. He had recovered his usual impudence, and after a brief pause answered, "Nothing, sir." The president resumed in a weak and faltering voice, "Then you acknowledge yourself guilty of the crime with which you are charged. You confess yourself to be the author of a conspiracy alike against the state and against one John Schumaker." "I do, my lord," replied Musdemon. The bishop rose. "Mr. President, that there may be no shadow of doubt in this affair, will your grace ask the prisoner if he had any accomplices?" "Accomplices?" repeated Musdemon. He hesitated a moment. The president wore a look of awful anxiety. "No, my lord bishop," he said at last. The president's look of relief fell full upon him. "No, I had no accomplices," repeated Musdemon, still more emphatically. "I concocted this plot through affection for my master, who knew nothing of it, to destroy his enemy, Schumaker." The eyes of prisoner and president met once more. "Your grace," said the bishop, "must see that as Musdemon had no accomplices, Baron Ordener Guldenlew must be innocent."
"Then why, worthy bishop, did he confess his guilt?"
"Mr. President, why did that mountaineer persist that he was Hans of Iceland, at the risk of his life? God alone knows our secret motives." Ordener took up the word. "Judges, I can tell you my motive, now that the real criminal has been discovered. I accused myself falsely to save the former chancellor, Schumaker, whose death would have left his daughter without a protector. The president bit his lip. "We request the court," said the bishop, "to proclaim the innocence of our client Ordener Guldenlew." The president responded with a nod, and at the request of the lord mayor they finished their examination of the terrible casket, which contained nothing more except Schumaker's titles of nobility and a few letters from the Munkholm prisoner to Captain Dispolsen, bitter but not criminal letters, which alarmed no one but Chancellor d'Ahlefeld. The court then withdrew, and after a brief deliberation, while the curious crowd, gathered on the parade, waited with stubborn impatience to see the viceroy's son led forth to die, and the executioner nonchalantly paced the scaffold, the president pronounced in a scarcely audible voice the death sentence of Turiaf Musdemon, the acquittal of Ordener Guldenlew, and the restoration of all his honors, titles, and privileges. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 49. What will you sell me your carcass for, my boy? I would not give you, in faith, a broken toy. St. Michael and Satan, old miracle play. The remnant of the regiment of Munkholm musketeers had returned to their old quarters in the barracks, which stood in the centre of a vast square courtyard within the fortress. At nightfall the doors of this building were barricaded, all the soldiers withdrawing into it, with the exception of the sentinels upon the various towers, and the handful of men on guard before the military prison adjoining the barracks. This, being the safest and best watched place of confinement in Munkholm, contained the two prisoners sentenced to be hanged on the following morning, Hans of Iceland and Musdemon. Hans of Iceland was alone in his cell. He was stretched upon the floor, chained, his head upon a stone. A feeble light filtered through a square grated opening, cut in the heavy oak door which divided his cell from the next room, where he heard his jailers laugh and swear, and heard the sound of the bottles which they drained, and the dice which they threw upon a drumhead. The monster silently writhed in the darkness, his limbs twitched convulsively, and he gnashed his teeth. All at once he lifted his voice and called aloud. A turnkey appeared at the grating. "What do you want?" said he. Hans of Iceland rose.
"Mate, I am cold. My stone bed is hard and damp. Give me a bundle of straw to sleep on, and a little fire to warm myself."
"It is only fair," replied the turnkey, "to give a little comfort to a poor devil who is going to be hung, even if he be the Iceland devil. I will bring you what you want. Have you any money?"
"No,"
replied the brigand. "What? You, the most famous robber in Norway, and you have not a few scurvy gold ducats in your pouch?"
"No,"
repeated the brigand. "A few little crowns?"
"I tell you, no."
"Not even a few paltry escalins?"
"No, no, nothing. Not enough to buy a rat's skin or a man's soul."
The turnkey shook his head.
"Oh, that's a different matter. You have no right to complain. Your cell is not so cold as the one you will have to sleep in tomorrow, and yet I'll be bound you won't notice the hardness of that bed."
So saying, the jailer withdrew, followed by the curses of the monster, who continued to rattle his chains, which gave forth a hollow clang, as if they were breaking slowly under repeated and violent jerks and pulls. The door opened. A tall man, dressed in red serge, carrying a dark lantern, entered the cell, accompanied by the jailer who had refused the prisoner's request. The latter at once became perfectly quiet.
"Hans of Iceland?" said the man in red. "I am Nicol Origix, executioner of the province of Trondheim. Tomorrow, at sunrise, I am to have the honor of hanging your excellency upon a fine new gallows in Trondheim market-place."
"Are you very sure that you will hang me?"
replied the brigand. The executioner laughed. "I wish you were as sure to rise straight into heaven by Jacob's ladder as you are to mount the scaffold by Nicol Origix's ladder."
Indeed,
said the monster with a malicious grin. I tell you again, Sir Brigand, that I am hangman for the province.
If I were not myself, I should like to be you,
replied the brigand. I can say the same for you, rejoined the hangman. Then, rubbing his hands with a conceited and complacent smirk, he added, My friend, you are right. Ours is a fine trade. Ah, my hand knows the weight of a man's head.
Have you often tasted blood?
Asked the brigand. No, but I have often used the rack.
Have you ever devoured the entrails of a living child?
No, but I have crushed men's bones in a vice. I have broken their limbs upon the wheel. I have dulled steel saws upon their skulls. I have torn their quivering flesh with red-hot pincers. I have burned the blood in their open veins by pouring in a stream of molten lead and boiling oil.
Yes,
said the brigand with a thoughtful look.
You have your pleasures too.
In fact, added the hangman, Hans of Iceland though you be, I imagine that my hands have released more human souls than yours, to say nothing of your own, which you must render up tomorrow.
Always provided that I have one. Do you suppose, then, executioner of Trondheim, that you can release the spirit of Ingolf from Hans of Iceland's mortal frame without its carrying off your own?
The executioner laughed heartily. Indeed, we shall see tomorrow.
We shall see,
said the brigand. Well, said the executioner, I did not come here to talk of your spirit, but only of your body. Hearken, your body by law belongs to me after your death, but the law gives you the right to sell it to me. Tell me what you will take for it.
What I will take for my corpse,
said the brigand. Yes, and be reasonable. Hans of Iceland turned to his jailer.
Tell me, mate, how much do you ask for a bundle of straw and a handful of fire?
The jailer reflected. 2 gold ducats.
Well,
said the brigand to the hangman,
you must give me 2 gold ducats for my corpse.
2 gold ducats? Cried the hangman. It is horribly dear. 2 gold ducats for a wretched corpse? No, indeed. I'll give no such price.
Then,
quietly responded the monster,
you shall not have it.
Then you will be thrown into the common sewer instead of adorning the Royal Museum at Copenhagen or the collection of curiosities at Bergen.
Pff, what do I care?
Long after your death, people will flock to look at your skeleton, saying, Those are the remains of the famous Hans of Iceland. Your bones will be nicely polished and strung on copper wire. You will be placed in a big glass case and dusted carefully every day. Instead of these honors, consider what awaits you if you refuse to sell me your body. You will be left to rot in some charnel house, where you will be the prey of worms and other vermin.
Well, I shall be like the living, who are perpetually preyed upon by their inferiors and devoured by their superiors.
2 gold ducats, muttered the hangman. What an exorbitant price! If you will not come down in your terms, my dear fellow, we can never make a trade.
It is my first and probably my last trade. I am bent on having it a good one.
Consider that I may make you repent of your obstinacy. Tomorrow you will be in my power.
Do you think so?
These words were uttered with a look which escaped the hangman. Yes, and there is a certain way of tightening a slip knot, but if you will only be reasonable, I will hang you in my best manner.
Little do I care what you do to my neck tomorrow,
replied the monster with a mocking air. Come, won't you be satisfied with 2 crowns? What can you do with the money?
Ask your comrade there,
said the brigand, pointing to the turnkey.
"He charges me 2 gold ducats for a handful of straw and a fire."
"Now by St. Joseph's saw," said the hangman, angrily addressing the turnkey, "it is shocking to make a man pay its weight in gold for a fire and a little worthless straw." "2 ducats," the turnkey replied sourly. "I've a good mind to make him pay 4. It is you, Master Nicol, who act like a regular screw in refusing to give this poor prisoner 2 gold ducats for his corpse, when you can sell it for at least 20 to some learned old fogey, or some doctor." "I never paid more than 20 escalins for a corpse in my life," said the hangman. "Yes," replied the jailer, "for the body of some paltry thief, or some miserable Jew, that may be. But everybody knows that you can get whatever you choose to ask for Hans of Iceland's body." Hans of Iceland shook his head. "What business is it of yours?" said Orugix curtly. "Do I interfere with your plunder? With the clothes and jewels that you steal from the prisoners, and the dirty water which you pour into their thin soup, and the torture to which you put them to extort money from them? No, I never will give you 2 gold ducats." "No straw, no fire for less than 2 gold ducats," replied the obstinate jailer.
"No corpse for less than 2 gold ducats,"
repeated the unmoved brigand. The hangman, after a brief pause, stamped his foot angrily, saying, "Well, I have no time to waste with you. I am wanted elsewhere." He drew from his waistcoat a leather bag, which he opened slowly and reluctantly. "There, cursed demon of Iceland, there are your 2 ducats. Satan would never give you as much for your soul as I do for your body, I am sure." The brigand accepted the gold. The turnkey instantly held out his hand to take it.
"1 instant, mate. First, give me what I asked for."
The jailer went out and soon returned with a bundle of dry straw and a pan of live coals, which he placed beside the prisoner.
"That's it,"
said the brigand, giving him the 2 ducats.
"I'll make a warm night of it. 1 word more," he added in an ominous tone. "Does not this prison adjoin the barracks of the Munkholm musketeers?"
"It does," said the jailer.
"And which way is the wind?"
"From the east, I think."
"Good,"
said the brigand. "What are you aiming at, comrade?" asked the jailer.
"Nothing,"
replied the brigand. "Farewell, comrade, until tomorrow morning early."
"Yes, tomorrow,"
repeated the brigand. And the noise of the heavy door, as it closed, prevented the jailer and his companion from hearing the fierce, jeering laughter which accompanied these words. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 50. Do you hope to end with another crime? Alex Hume. Let us now take a look at the other cell in the military prison adjoining the barracks, which holds our old acquaintance Turiaf Musdemon. It may seem surprising that Musdemon, crafty and cowardly as he was, should so readily confess his crime to the court which condemned him, and so generously conceal the share of his ungrateful master, Chancellor d'Ahlefeld, in it. However, Musdemon had not experienced a change of heart. His noble frankness was perhaps the greatest proof of cunning which he could possibly have given. When he saw his infernal intrigue so unexpectedly exposed, beyond all hope of denial, he was for an instant stunned and terrified. Conquering his alarm, his extreme shrewdness soon showed him that as it was impossible to destroy his chosen victims, he must bend all his energies to saving himself. 2 plans at once presented themselves. The first, to throw all the blame upon Count d'Ahlefeld, who had so basely deserted him. The second, to assume the whole burden of the crime himself. A vulgar mind would have grasped at the former. Musdemon chose the latter. The Chancellor was Chancellor, after all. Besides, there was nothing in the papers which directly implicated him, although they contained overwhelming evidence against his secretary. Then his master had given him several meaning looks. This was enough to confirm him in his purpose to suffer himself to be condemned, confident that Count d'Ahlefeld would connive at his escape, though less from gratitude for past service than through his need for future aid. He therefore paced his prison, which was dimly lighted by a wretched lamp, never doubting that the door would be thrown open during the night. He studied the architecture of the old stone cell, built by kings whose very names have almost vanished from the pages of history, and was much surprised to find a wooden plank which echoed back his tread as if it covered some subterranean vault. He also observed a huge iron ring cemented into the arched roof, from which hung a fragment of rope. Time passed, and he listened impatiently to the clock on the tower as it slowly struck the hours, its mournful toll resounding through the silence of the night. At last there was a footfall outside his cell. His heart beat high with hope. The massive bolt creaked, the padlock dropped, and as the door opened, his face beamed with delight. It was the same character in scarlet robes whom we have just encountered in Hans of Iceland's prison. He had a coil of hempen cord under his arm, and was accompanied by 4 halberdiers in black, armed with swords and partisans. Musdemon still wore the wig and gown of a magistrate. His dress seemed to impress the man in red, who bowed low as if accustomed to respect that garb, and said with some hesitation, "Sir, is our business with your worship?" "Yes, yes," hastily replied Musdemon, confirmed in his hope of escape by this polite address, and failing to observe the bloody hue of the speaker's garments. "Your name," said the man, his eyes fixed on a parchment which he had just unrolled, "is Turiaf Musdemon, I believe?" "Just so. Do you come from the Chancellor, my friend?" "Yes, your worship." "Do not fail, when you have done your errand, to assure his grace of my undying gratitude." The man in red looked at him in amazement. "Your gratitude?" "Yes, to be sure, my friend, for it will probably be out of my power to thank him in person very soon." "Probably," dryly replied the man. "And you must feel," added Musdemon, "that I owe him a deep debt of gratitude for such a service." "By the cross of the repentant thief," cried the man with a coarse laugh. "To hear you, one would think that the Chancellor was doing something quite unusual for you." "Well, to be sure, it is no more than strict justice." "Strict justice, that is the word. But you acknowledge that it is justice. It is the first admission of the kind that I ever heard in the 26 years that I have followed my profession. Come, sir, we waste our time in idle talk. Are you ready?" "I am," said the delighted Musdemon, stepping to the door. Wait a minute," exclaimed the man in red, stooping to lay his coil of rope on the floor. Musdemon paused. "What are you going to do with all that rope?" "Your worship may well ask. I know that there is much more than I shall need, but when I began on this affair, I thought there would be a great many more prisoners." "Come, make haste," said Musdemon. "Your worship is in a wonderful hurry. Have you no last favour to ask?" "None but the one I have already mentioned, that you will thank his grace for me. For God's sake, make haste," added Musdemon. "I long to get away from here. Have we a long journey before us?" "A long journey," replied the man in red, straightening himself and measuring off a few lengths of rope. "The journey will not tire your worship much, for we can make it without leaving this room." Musdemon shuddered. "What do you mean?" "What do you mean yourself?" asked the man. "Oh, God," said Musdemon, turning pale. "Who are you?" "I am the hangman." The poor wretch trembled like a dry leaf blown by the wind. "Did you not come to help me to escape?" he feebly muttered. The hangman laughed. "Yes, truly, to help you to escape into the spirit land, whence I warrant you will not be brought back." Musdemon grovelled on the floor. "Mercy! Have pity on me! Mercy!" "In faith," coldly observed the hangman, "'tis the first time I was ever asked such a thing. Do you take me for the king?" The unfortunate man dragged himself on his knees, trailing his gown in the dust, beating his head against the floor and clasping the hangman's feet with muffled groans and broken sobs. "Come, be quiet," said the hangman. "I never before saw a black gown kneel to a red jerkin." He kicked the suppliant aside, adding, "Pray to God and the saints, fellow. They will be more apt to hear you than I." Musdemon still knelt, his face buried in his hands, weeping bitterly. Meantime the hangman, standing on tiptoe, passed his rope through the ring in the ceiling. He let it hang until it reached the floor, then secured it by a double turn, and made a slip knot in the end. "I am ready," said he when these ominous preparations were over. "Are you ready to lay down your life?" "No," said Musdemon, springing up. "No, it cannot be. There is some horrible mistake. Chancellor d'Ahlefeld is not so base. I am too necessary to him. It is impossible that it was for me he sent you. Let me escape. Do not fear that the Chancellor will be angry." "Did you not say," replied the executioner, "that you were Turiaf Musdemon?" The prisoner hesitated for an instant, then said suddenly, "No, no, my name is not Musdemon. My name is Turiaf Orugix." "Orugix?" cried the executioner. "Orugix?" He snatched off the periwig which concealed the prisoner's face, and uttered an exclamation of surprise. "My brother!" "Your brother?" replied the prisoner, with a mixture of shame and pleasure. "Can you be—" "Nicol Orugix, hangman for the province of Trondheim. At your service, brother Turiaf." The prisoner fell upon the executioner's neck, calling him his brother, his beloved brother. This fraternal recognition would not have gratified any one who witnessed it. Turiaf lavished countless caresses upon Nicol with a forced and timid smile, while Nicol responded with a gloomy and embarrassed look. It was like a tiger fondling an elephant, while the monster's ponderous foot is already planted upon its panting chest. "What happiness, brother Nicol! I am glad indeed to see you." "And I am sorry for you, brother Turiaf." The prisoner pretended not to hear these words, and went on in trembling tones. "You have a wife and children, I suppose. You must take me to see my gentle sister, and let me kiss my dear nephews." "The devil fly away with you," muttered the hangman. "I will be a second father to them. Hark ye, brother. I am powerful. I have great influence." The brother replied with a sinister expression. "I know that you had. At present you had better be thinking of that which you have doubtless contrived to curry with the saints." All hope faded from the prisoner's face. "Good God! What does this mean, dear Nicol? I am safe since I have found you. Think that the same mother bore us, that we played together as children. Remember, Nicol, you are my brother." "You never remembered it until now," replied the brutal Nicol. "No, I cannot die by my brother's hand." "It is your own fault, Turiaf. It was you who ruined my career, who prevented me from becoming royal executioner at Copenhagen, who caused me to be sent into this miserable region as a petty provincial hangman. If you had not been a bad brother, you would have no cause to complain of that which distresses you so much now. I should not be in Trondheim, and someone else would have to finish your business. Now enough, brother. You must die." Death is hideous to the wicked for the same reason that it is beautiful to the good. Both must put off their humanity, but the just man is delivered from his body as from a prison, while the wicked man is torn from it as from a jail. At the last moment hell yawns before the sinful soul which has dreamed of annihilation. It knocks anxiously at the dark portals of death, and it is not annihilation that answers. The prisoner rolled upon the floor and wrung his hands, with moans more heart-rending than the everlasting wail of the damned.
"Oh God, have mercy! Holy angels in heaven, if you exist, have pity upon me! Nicol, brother Nicol, in our mother's name, oh, let me live!"
The hangman held out his warrant. "I cannot. The order is peremptory."
"That warrant is not for me," stammered the despairing prisoner. "It is for one Musdemon. That is not I. I am Turiaf Orugix."
"You jest." said Nicol, shrugging his shoulders. I know perfectly well that it is meant for you. Besides, he added roughly, yesterday you would not have been Turiaf Origix to your brother. Today he can only look upon you as Turiaf Musdemon.
Oh, brother,
groaned the wretch.
Only wait until tomorrow. It is impossible that the Chancellor could have given the order for my death. It is some frightful mistake.
Count d'Ahlefeld loves me dearly.
Dear Nicol, I implore you, spare my life. I shall soon be restored to favor, and I will do whatever you may ask.
You can do me but one service, Turiaf, broke in the hangman. I have lost 2 executions already, upon which I counted the most, those of ex-Chancellor Schumaker and the viceroy's son. I am always unlucky. You and Hans of Iceland are all that are left. Your execution, being secret and by night, is worth at least 12 gold ducats to me. Let me hang you peaceably. That is the only favor I ask of you.
Oh, God,
sighed the prisoner. It will be the first and the last, in good sooth. But in return, I promise that you shall not suffer. I will hang you like a brother. Submit to your fate. Musdemon sprang to his feet. His nostrils were distended with rage, his livid lips quivered, his teeth chattered, his mouth foamed with despair.
Ah, Satan!
I saved that d'Ahlefeld. I have embraced my brother, and they murder me. And I must die this very night in a dark dungeon, where none can hear my curses, where I may not cry out against them from one end of the kingdom to the other, where I may not tear asunder the veil that hides their crimes. Was it for such a death that I have stained my entire life? Wretch, he added, turning to his brother, would you become a fratricide? I am the executioner, answered the phlegmatic Nicol.
No,
exclaimed the prisoner, and he flung himself headlong upon the executioner, his eyes darting flame and streaming with tears, like those of a bull at bay.
No, I will not die thus meekly. I have not lived like a poisonous serpent to die like a paltry worm trampled under foot. I will leave my life in my last sting, but it shall be mortal.
So saying, he grappled like a bitter foe with him whom he had just embraced as a brother. The fulsome, flattering Musdemon now showed his true spirit. Despair stirred up the foul dregs of his soul, and after crawling prostrate like a tiger he sprang upon his enemy. It would have been hard to decide which of the 2 brothers was the most appalling as they struggled, one with the brute ferocity of a wild beast, the other with the artful fury of a demon. But the 4 halberdiers, hitherto passive spectators, did not remain motionless. They lent their aid to the executioner, and soon Musdemon, whose rage was his only strength, was forced to quit his hold. He dashed himself against the wall, uttering inarticulate yells, and blunting his nails upon the stone.
To die! Devils in hell, to die! My shrieks unheard outside this roof, my arms powerless to tear down these walls.
He was seized, but offered no resistance. His useless efforts had exhausted him. He was stripped of his gown and bound. At this moment a sealed packet fell from his bosom. "What is that?" said the hangman. An infernal light gleamed in the prisoner's haggard eyes. He muttered, "How could I forget that? Look here, brother Nicol," he added in an almost friendly tone. "These papers belong to the Lord Chancellor. Promise to give them to him, and you may do what you will with me." "Since you are quiet now, I promise to grant your last wish, although you have been a bad brother to me. I will see that the Chancellor has the papers, on the honor of an Origix." "Ask leave to hand them to him yourself," replied the prisoner, smiling at the executioner, who from his nature had little understanding of smiles. "The pleasure which they will afford his grace may lead him to confer some favor on you." "Oh, really, brother?" said Origix. "Thank you. Perhaps he will make me executioner royal after all, eh? Well, let us part good friends. I forgive you all the scratches which you gave me. Forgive me for the hempen collar which I must give you." The Chancellor promised me a very different sort of collar, said Musdemon. Then the halberdiers led him, bound, into the middle of the cell. The hangman placed the fatal noose round his neck. Are you ready, Turiaf?
1 moment, 1 moment,
said the prisoner, whose terror had revived.
For mercy's sake, brother, do not pull the rope until I tell you to do so.
I do not need to pull it, answered the hangman. A moment later he repeated his question. Are you ready?
1 moment more. Alas, must I die?
Turiaf, I have no time to waste. So saying, Orugix signed to the halberdiers to stand away from the prisoner. 1 word more, brother. Do not forget to give the packet to Count d'Ahlefeld. Never fear, replied Nicol. He added for the 3rd time, Come, are you ready? The unfortunate man opened his lips, perhaps to plead for another brief delay, when the impatient hangman stooped and turned a brass button projecting from the floor. The plank gave way beneath the victim. The poor wretch disappeared through a square trapdoor, with a dull twang from the rope, which was stretched suddenly and vibrated fearfully with the dying man's final convulsions. Nothing was seen but the rope swinging to and fro in the dark opening, through which came a cool breeze and a sound as of running water. The halberdiers themselves shrank back, horror-stricken. The hangman approached the abyss, seized the rope which still vibrated, and swung himself into the hole, pressing both feet against his victim's shoulders. The fatal rope stretched to its utmost with a creak, and stood still. A stifled sob rose from the trap. All is over, said the hangman, climbing back into the cell. Farewell, brother. He drew a cutlass from his belt. Go feed the fishes in the fjord. Your body to the waves, your soul to the flames. With these words he cut the taut rope. The fragment still fastened to the iron ring lashed the ceiling, while the deep dark waters splashed high as the body fell, then swept on their underground course. The hangman closed the trap as he had opened it. As he rose, he saw that the room was full of smoke. What is all this? He asked the halberdiers. Where does this smoke come from? They knew no better than he. In surprise they opened the door. The corridors were also filled with thick and nauseating smoke. A secret outlet led them, greatly terrified, to the square courtyard, where a fearful sight met their gaze. A vast conflagration, fanned by a violent east wind, was consuming the military prison and the barracks. The flames, driven in eddying whirls, climbed stone walls, crowned burning roofs, leaped from gaping window frames, and the black towers of Munkholm now shone in a red and ominous light, now vanished in a dense cloud of smoke. A turnkey, who was escaping by the courtyard, told them hastily that the fire had broken out in the monster cell during the sleep of Hans of Iceland's keepers, he having been imprudently allowed to have a fire and straw. How unlucky I am, cried Orugix when he heard this story. Now I suppose Hans of Iceland has slipped through my hands too. The rascal must have been burned. And I shan't even get his body, for which I paid 2 ducats. Meantime the unfortunate Munkholm musketeers, roused suddenly from their sleep by imminent death, crowded toward the door, only to find it closely barred. Their shrieks of anguish and despair were heard outside. They stood at the blazing windows, wringing their hands, or dashed themselves madly upon the flagging of the court, escaping one death to meet another. The victorious flames devoured the entire structure before the rest of the garrison could come to the rescue. All help was vain. Luckily the building stood by itself. The door was broken in with hatchets, but it was too late, for as it opened the burning roof and floors gave way, and fell upon the unfortunate man with a loud crash. The entire building disappeared in a whirlwind of fiery dust and burning smoke, which stifled the faint moans of the expiring man. Next morning nothing was left in the courtyard but 4 high walls, black and smoking, around a horrid mass of smouldering ruins, still devouring each other like wild beasts in a circus. When the pile had cooled, it was searched. Beneath a heap of stones and iron beams, twisted out of shape by the flames, was found a mass of whitened bones and disfigured corpses. With some 30 soldiers, most of whom were crippled, this was all that remained of the crack regiment of Munkholm. When the site of the prison was searched, and they reached the fatal cell where the fire had broken out, and where Hans of Iceland had been imprisoned, They found the remains of a human body, close beside an iron pan and a heap of broken chains. It was curious that among these ashes there were 2 skulls, although there was but 1 skeleton. End of chapter 50. Chapter 51 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 51. Saladin. Bravo, Ibrahim! You are indeed the messenger of good fortune. I thank you for your joyful tidings. The Mameluke. Well, is that all? Saladin. What did you expect? The Mameluke. Nothing more for the messenger of good fortune. Lessing, Nathan the Wise. Pale and worn, Count d'Ahlefeld strode up and down his apartment. In his hand he crushed a bundle of letters which he had just read, while he stamped his foot on the smooth marble floor and the gold-fringed rugs. At the other end of the room, in an attitude of deep respect, stood Nicol Orugix, in his infamous scarlet dress, felt hat in hand.
You have done me good service, Musdemon,
hissed the Chancellor. The hangman looked up timidly.
Is your Grace pleased? What do you want here?
Said the Chancellor, turning upon him suddenly. The hangman, proud that he had won a glance from the Chancellor, smiled hopefully. What do I want, your Grace? The post of executioner at Copenhagen, if your Grace will deign to bestow so great a favour on me in return for the good news I have brought you. The Chancellor called to the 2 halberdiers on guard at his door.
Seize this rascal. He annoys me by his impudence.
The guards led away the amazed and confounded Nicol, who ventured one more word.
My lord! You are no longer hangman for the province of Trondheim. I deprive you of your office,
cried the Chancellor, slamming the door. The Chancellor returned to his letters, angrily read and re-read them, maddened by his dishonour, for these were the letters which once passed between the Countess and Musdemon. This was Elphega's handwriting. He found that Ulrica was not his daughter, that, it might be, the Frederick whom he mourned was not his son. The unhappy Count was punished through that same pride which had caused all his crimes. He cared not now if vengeance evaded him. All his ambitious dreams vanished. His past was blasted, his future dead. He had striven to destroy his enemies. He had only succeeded in losing his own reputation, his adviser, and even his marital and paternal rights. But he must see once more the wretched woman who had betrayed him. He hastily crossed the spacious apartment, shaking the letters in his hand as if they were a thunderbolt. He threw open the door of Elphega's room. He entered. The guilty wife had just unexpectedly learned from Colonel Votun of her son Frederick's fearful death. The poor mother was insane. End of chapter 51. Conclusion of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Conclusion. What I said in jest, you took seriously. Old Spanish Romance, King Alfonso to Bernard. For a fortnight the events which we have just related formed the sole topic of conversation in the town and province of Trondheim, judged from the various standpoints of the various speakers. The people of the town, who had waited in vain to see 7 successive executions, began to despair of ever having that pleasure, and purblind old women declared that, on the night of the lamentable fire at the barracks, they had seen Hans of Iceland fly up in the flames, laughing amid the blaze, as he dashed the burning roof of the building upon the Munkholm musketeers. When, after an absence which to his Ethel seemed an age, Ordener returned to the Lion of Schleswig tower, accompanied by General Levin de Knud and Chaplain Athanasius Munder. Schumaker was walking in the garden, leaning on his daughter. The young couple found it hard not to rush into each other's arms, but they were forced to be content with a look. Schumaker affectionately grasped Ordener's hand and greeted the 2 strangers in a friendly manner. "Young man," said the aged captive, "may heaven bless your return." "Sir," replied Ordener, I have just arrived. Having seen my father at Bergen, I would now embrace my father at Munkholm."
"What do you mean?"
asked the old man in great surprise. "That you must give me your daughter, noble sir."
"My daughter!"
exclaimed the prisoner, turning to the confused and blushing Ethel. "Yes, my lord, I love your Ethel. I have devoted my life to her. She is mine." Schumaker's face clouded.
"You are a brave and noble youth, my son. Although your father has done me much harm, I forgive him for your sake, and I should be glad to sanction this marriage. But there is an obstacle."
"What is it, sir?" asked Ordener anxiously.
"You love my daughter, but are you sure that she loves you?"
The two lovers cast at each other a rapid glance of mute amazement.
"Yes,"
continued the father,
"I am sorry, for I love you, and would gladly call you son. But my daughter would never consent. She has recently confessed her aversion for you, and since your departure she is silent whenever I speak of you, and seems to avoid all thought of you, as if you were odious to her. You must give up your love for her, Ordener. Never fear, love may be cured as well as hatred."
"My lord!" exclaimed the astonished Ordener.
"Father!"
cried Ethel, clasping her hands.
"Do not be alarmed, my daughter," interrupted the old man. "I approve of this marriage, but you do not. I will never force your inclinations, Ethel. This last fortnight has wrought a great change in me. You are free to choose for yourself."
Athanasius Munder smiled.
"She is not," he said.
"You are mistaken, dear father,"
added Ethel, taking courage.
"I do not hate Ordener."
"What?"
cried her father.
"I am,"
resumed Ethel. She hesitated. Ordener knelt at the old man's feet.
"She is my wife, father. Forgive me as my other father has forgiven me, and bless your children."
Schumaker, surprised in his turn, blessed the young couple.
"I have cursed so many people in my lifetime," said he, "that I now seize every opportunity for blessing. But explain."
All was made clear to him. He wept with emotion, gratitude, and love.
"I thought myself wise. I am old, and I did not understand the heart of a young girl."
"And so I am Mrs. Ordener Guldenlew,"
said Ethel with childlike delight.
"Ordener Guldenlew,"
rejoined old Schumaker,
"you are a better man than I, for in the day of my prosperity I would never have stooped to wed the penniless and disgraced daughter of an unfortunate prisoner."
The general took the old man's hand, and offered him a roll of parchment, saying,
"Do not speak thus, Count. Here are your titles, which the king long since sent you by Dispolsen. His Majesty now adds a free pardon. Such is the dowry of your daughter, Countess Danneskjold."
"Pardon! Freedom!"
repeated the enraptured Ethel.
"Countess Danneskjold,"
added her father.
"Yes, Count," continued the general, "your honors and estates are restored."
"To whom do I owe all this?" asked the happy Schumaker.
"To General Levin de Knud," answered Ordener.
"Levin de Knud.
Did I not tell you, governor, that Levin de Knud was the best of men? But why did he not bring me the good news himself? Where is he?"
Ordener pointed in surprise to the smiling, weeping general.
"Here."
The recognition of the two who had been comrades in the days of their youth and power was a touching one. Schumaker's heart swelled. His acquaintance with Hans had destroyed his hatred of men. His acquaintance with Ordener and Levin taught him to love them. The gloomy wedding in the cell was soon celebrated by brilliant festivities. Life smiled upon the young couple who had smiled at death. Count d'Ahlefeld saw that they were happy. This was his most cruel punishment. Athanasius Munder shared their joy. He obtained the pardon of his 12 convicts, and Ordener added that of his former companions in misfortune, Cannibal, Jonas, and Norbith, who returned, free and happy, to inform the appeased miners that the king released them from the protectorate. Schumaker did not long enjoy the union of Ethel and Ordener. Liberty and happiness were too much for him. He went to enjoy a different happiness and a different freedom. He died that same year, 1699, his children accepting this blow as a warning that there is no perfect bliss in this world. He was buried in Veer Church, upon an estate in Jutland, belonging to his son-in-law, and his tomb preserves all the titles of which captivity deprived him. From the marriage of Ordener and Ethel sprang the race of the Counts of Daneskjold. End of conclusion. End of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. Recording by Sonia. Thank you for listening.